My HOA tried to ruin me with a $50,000 fine, so I destroyed their neighborhood instead. In 2017, I bought my first house in a neighborhood that was built around a small lake in the middle of the development. The houses were nice, and so was the neighborhood, except for one thing. It had an HOA that looked like they'd taken membership in the Bene Gesserit from Dune, because every single woman in there seemed to be about 60 years old and had wild hair that would put a lion to shame. They also had more rules than you could shake a stick at, and it seemed like most of those rules were designed to harass people for fun. Like, you couldn't wash your car on the street. You couldn't park your car on the street, even though everyone did it. And if your grass was more than 2 inches taller than your neighbor, you got a warning letter. Yeah, really. At the time, I was building my own business, and I had a lot of boxes and equipment sitting in front of my garage while I organized it. After 3 days, I got a warning letter saying I had 48 hours to clean up, or I'd get a hefty fine. I decided to wait until after hours and just wash and organize everything on the driveway. Well, being new to the area, I didn't realize that all the driveways sloped towards the storm drains which fed into the lake. Everything washed into the lake, including oil and other fluids from the equipment. I felt terrible and immediately started fishing the stuff out of the lake. When the nosy neighbors saw me, they started taking pictures. The next day, I got 3 letters. One was from code enforcement for washing your car on the street. Another was from the police for dumping fluids into the storm drain, and a third was from the HOA for contaminating the lake. Code enforcement was dropped when I showed them I wasn't doing it again, and I paid the fine for dumping oil. But the HOA was persistent. They said they were going to take me to court unless I paid the $50,000 fee. Mind you, this was 3 months before the presidential election, and I was running for local city council to try and reform the HOA system in our city. So I took it to the news media. That Monday morning, the president of the HOA called me to try and settle things down. She told me she'd drop the fine if I'd plant some trees by the lake to make up for what I'd done. I told her I'd rather go to court and let a judge decide. She hung up on me, and I called the reporter back to let her know we weren't settling. 2 days later, I was summoned to the HOA meeting where they made me defend myself in front of the entire organization. I showed them evidence I wasn't dumping anything and explained that I was just trying to clean up. They fined me anyway. So I went to the media again, and they ran a front-page story about the HOA's behavior. As a result, I was inundated with messages of support from residents in the neighborhood. Turns out a lot of people wanted to get rid of the HOA, but were afraid to start a fight. After the article came out, I helped them form a group to fight the HOA. We discovered that the HOA president and her cronies had been illegally self-serving for years, violating state law and the HOA's own CC&Rs. It was beautiful. After a year and a half of hearings, we had the HOA dissolved and turned over the deed to the city. The city spent $5 million cleaning up the lake, tearing down the clubhouse the HOA had built without permits, and demolishing the tennis courts that were leaching chemicals into the water. And now anyone who lives in the neighborhood can use the lake and its walking path. This is why you don't mess with people's time and money, because if you do, they will get back at you in ways you never imagined possible. Our next Reddit post is from Cognito Inc. There was this giant tree that had been in my backyard for as long as I could remember. When I was a kid, it was the coolest thing ever because I could climb it and hide in it. My dad even built us a tree house in it. But one day during a windstorm, it was struck by lightning, and it's been dead ever since. It sat there for another 10 years or so, until the HOA finally sent me a notice saying I had to cut it down. When I asked why, they said it was dead and dying, and that I had to keep my grass trimmed. And they also mentioned something about how the tree was a hazard. Well, I was very reluctant to cut it down because it meant that I'd lose access to the tree house, which was still there. But I figured the HOA wasn't wrong. So I called a guy to come cut it down. The guy looked at the tree and said, "No way, this thing is massive. I'll have to bring in heavy equipment and we'll have to cut it into sections." He told me it was going to cost 8 grand just to cut down the tree. But then he said something that made me change my mind. He said, "Listen, if you want, I can leave the top there and we can dismantle the rest of the tree and cart it away piece by piece. It'll take longer, but it'll cost you only $200. I thought about it, and that sounded perfect to me. I didn't want to lose the treehouse, and I didn't want to pay 8 grand to cut it down. So I told the guy to dismantle it piece by piece. So that weekend, my son and I spent about 4 hours cutting branches off and throwing them over the fence into the neighbor's yard. By the end of the day, about half the tree was gone and I hadn't spent a dime. On Sunday, I heard some yelling coming from next door. Apparently, the neighbor had come out to investigate the noise, and he was furious about me throwing branches into his yard. He started yelling about how I was littering and how I should have asked permission before throwing stuff into his yard, and how he was going to call the cops. And I just stood there, calmly eating a bag of popcorn and smiling. He stomped back inside and slammed the door. So I went back to work, finishing up the tree. By the end of the second day, the whole thing was gone. The neighbor came outside to check on my progress, and he saw that all that was left was the tree stump and the tree house. He asked me if I was almost done, and I told him I was, but that he'd have to come help me finish it. He asked what he was supposed to do, and I told him he'd have to cut down the tree stump and dismantle the tree house. He started yelling at me, and then he went back inside. That was the last I saw of him. 1 week later, the HOA president came over to inspect the damage, and she was furious. She said I had broken several laws and violated the CC&Rs, and she said I was going to have to pay a hefty fine. I told her that according to the CC&Rs, she was supposed to give me 30 days written notice to correct violations, and she hadn't done that. She tried to argue, but I wouldn't let her. So she stormed off and hasn't been seen since. OP, you win for today. That was r/malicious compliance. And if you like this content, check out my Patreon, where I publish extra episodes. Also hit that subscribe button because I put out new videos every single day.